The Martin B-57 Cambra is a United States-built, twin-jet engine tactical bomber and reconnaissance aircraft that entered service with the United States Air Force in 1953. The B-57 was a license-built version of the English electric Cambra. The Glen L. Martin Company later modified the design to produce several unique variants. The Canberra was the first U.S. jet bomber to drop bombs during combat. Its retirement in 1983 ended the era of the tactical bomber that had its beginning with the World War I de Havilland DH-4. The three remaining flight-worthy WB-57Fs are technically assigned to the NASA Johnson Space Center, next to Ellington Field in Houston, as high-altitude scientific research aircraft, but are also used for testing and communications in the U.S. and Afghanistan. Development. At the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, the USAF found itself in dire need of an all-weather interdiction aircraft. The piston-engined Douglas A-26 Invaders were limited to fair-weather operations and were in short supply. On September 16, 1950, the USAF issued a request for a jet-powered bomber with a top speed of 630 mph, ceiling of 40,000 feet, and range of 1,150 miles. Full all-weather capability and secondary reconnaissance role had to be included in the design. To expedite the process, only projects based on existing aircraft were considered. The contenders included the Martin X B-51, and the North American B-45 Tornado and A.J. Savage. Unusually, the service considered foreign aircraft, including the Canadian Avro-Canada CF-100 Canuck and the new British English electric Cambra, which had not yet officially entered service with the Royal Air Force. The AJ and B-45 were quickly dismissed, because their outdated designs had limited growth potential. The CF-100, an all-weather interceptor, was too small and lacked sufficient range. The XB-51, while very promising and much faster, had limited maneuverability, a small weapons bay and limited range and endurance. On February 21, 1951, a British Canberra B-2 flown by Roland Beaumont became the first jet to make a non-stop unrefueled flight across the Atlantic Ocean, arriving in the United States for USAF evaluation. In a February 26 fly-off against the XB-51, the Canberra emerged a clear winner. It was officially taken up by the USAF on May 25, 1951. However, because its production lines were working at full capacity to meet the Royal Air Force orders, English Electric was unable to produce additional aircraft quickly enough for USAF requirements, and on April 3, 1951, Martin was granted a license to build Cambras, designated B-57 in the United States. To expedite production, the first B-57s were largely identical to the Canberra B-2. With the exception of more powerful Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire engines of 7,200 pound-force of thrust instead of Rolls-Royce Avons, also license-built in the United States as Wright J-65s. In addition, canopy and fuselage windows were slightly revised, the crew was reduced from 3 to 2, wingtip fuel tanks were added, engine nacelles were modified with additional cooling scoops, and the conventional clamshell bomb bay doors were replaced with a low-drag rotating door originally designed for the XB-51. The first production aircraft flew on July 20, 1953, and was accepted by the USAF a month later on August 20. During the production run from 1953 to 1957, a total of 403 B-57s were built. Operational history. The B-57A was not considered combat-ready by the USAF and the aircraft were used solely for testing and development. One of the aircraft was given to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which fitted it with a new nose radome and used it to track hurricanes. The aircraft was placed into limited production. Particularly contentious were the cockpit arrangement and the lack of guns, the Canberra having been designed as a high-speed, high-altitude bomber rather than for close air support. The definitive B-57B introduced a new tandem cockpit with a bubble canopy, the engines were now started with a pyrotechnic cartridge, the air brakes were moved from the wings to the sides of the fuselage for increased effectiveness, the controls were now boosted, 4 hardpoints were fitted under the wings, and the aircraft was given gun armament in the form of 8 0.50-inch Browning machine guns in the wings, later replaced by 4 20mm M39 cannons. The first B-57B flew on June 18, 1954. The aircraft initially suffered from the same engine malfunctions as the B-57s, and several were lost in high-speed low-level operations due to a faulty tailplane actuator which caused the aircraft to dive into the ground. The USAF considered the B-57B inadequate for the night intruder role, and Martin put all aircraft through an extensive avionics upgrade. Regardless, by the end of 1957, the USAF tactical squadrons were being re-equipped with supersonic North American F-100 Super Sabres. The complete retirement was delayed, however, by the start of the Vietnam War. Reconnaissance and electronic warfare B-57s, see also, 7407th Support Squadron, Martin B-57D Canberra, Martin B-57F Canberra, Martin WB-57F Canberra. While the USAF found the B-57A lacking, the photo reconnaissance B-57A saw some operational use. First flying in October 1953, B-57s fully equipped the 363rd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing at Shaw Air Force Base by July 1954. The aircraft were also deployed with USAF squadrons in Germany, France, and Japan. However, operational readiness was poor and the aircraft suffered from significant production delays because of engine problems. Wright had subcontracted production of J-65 engines to Buick, which resulted in slow deliveries and a tendency for engine oil to enter the bleed air system, filling the cockpit with smoke. The problems were ameliorated when Wright took over engine production in 1954. B-57 has also suffered from a high accident rate caused in part by poor single-engine handling. This resulted in the entire fleet spending much of 1955 on the ground. By 1958, all B-57A craft were replaced in active service by the Douglas B-66B and McDonnell RF-101A. Air National Guard units extensively used the B-57A for photographic surveys of the United States until 1971. A number of modified B-57s were used by the 7499th Support Group at Wiesbaden AB, West Germany in Operation Heartthrob reconnaissance missions over Europe. 10 aircraft were pulled off Martin's production line and modifications were performed in August 1955 by the Wright Air Development Center and by Martin. All equipment not absolutely essential for the daytime photography role was eliminated. The bomb bay door was removed and the area was skinned over. The seat for the system operator navigator was removed, and an optical viewfinder was installed in the nose so that the pilot could perform all the reconnaissance duties without the assistance of the navigator. The clear plexiglass nose cone was replaced by an opaque fiberglass cone, but with a small optical glass window cut for the viewfinder. The plane's J-65 BW-5s were replaced by higher thrust J-65 W-7s. The aircraft was referred to as a B-57A-1. The weight reduction program shaved 5,665 pounds off the weight of the B-57A, and the ceiling was increased by 5,000 feet. 2 B-57A-1s were used by the Republic of China Air Force for reconnaissance missions over China. One was shot down by a Chinese MiG-1 MiG-17 on February 18, 1958 and the pilot killed. In 1959, 2 B-57DS were delivered to replace the A-types. One of them was shot down over China by a SA-2 guideline missile, marking the very first successful operational engagement of surface-to-air missiles. 2 other B-57s were used by the Federal Aviation Administration to plan high-altitude airways for the upcoming jet passenger aircraft. Starting in 1959, Martin began to modify retired B-57s with electronic countermeasures equipment in the bomb bay. Redesignated EB-57A, these aircraft were deployed with Defense Systems Evaluation Squadrons which played the role of aggressors to train the friendly air defense units in the art of electronic warfare. Subsequent bomber variants were also modified to fulfill this role. Although initially conducted by active duty Air Force units, The EB-57 mission eventually migrated to selected units of the Air National Guard. The ANG's EB-57s were replaced, in the 1980s, by the USAF's more advanced General Dynamics Grumman EF-111A Raven operated by the active duty USAF. Strategic Air Command employed 20 B-57D aircraft from 1956 until 1964. Little is known about their use. The aircraft were retired due to structural fatigue and the advent of the U-2 and SA-71. For many years 2 B-57F Cambras were flown and maintained by NASA for high-altitude atmospheric research. These same two aircraft also deployed alternately to Afghanistan for use as communications platforms that fly high over an area linking various communications devices on the battlefield and in the air. This is the Battlefield Airborne Communications Node System. In 2011 it was determined that a third aircraft was needed to satisfy mission requirements and an additional WB-57 was removed from the 309th AMARG after over 40 years at Davis Monthan AFB and returned to flight status in August 2013 as NASA 927. Vietnam War, see also, Patricia Lynn Project. Although intended as a bomber and never before deployed by the USAF to a combat zone, the first B-57s to be deployed to South Vietnam were not operated in an offensive role. The need for additional reconnaissance assets, especially those capable of operating at night, led to the deployment of two B-57E aircraft on April 15, 1963. Under Project Patricia Lynn these aircraft provided infrared coverage using their Reconnafax 6 cameras. Later in August 1965, a single RB-57F would be deployed to Udon, RTAB in an attempt to gather information about North Vietnamese SAM sites, first under Project Greek God and then under Project Mad King. In December another RB-57F would be deployed for this purpose, under Project Skywave. Neither project garnered useful results and they were terminated in October 1965 and February 1966 respectively. The deployment of actual combat-capable B-57Bs from 8th and 13th Bomb Squadrons to Bien Hoa Air Base in August 1964 began with 2 aircraft lost and 1 damaged in collisions on arrival. An additional 5 aircraft were destroyed with another 15 damaged by a Viet Cong mortar attack in November of the same year. Low-level sorties designated as training flights were conducted with the hope of it having a psychological effect. As a result the first combat mission was only flown on February 19, 1965. The first excursion into North Vietnam took place on March 2 as part of Operation Rolling Thunder. The aircraft typically carried 9 500 ALB bombs in the bomb bay and 4 750 ALB bombs under the wings. In April, Canberras began flying night intruder missions supported by USAF's Fairchild C-123 provider or Lockheed C-130 Hercules flare ships and USN's EF-10B Skik night electronic warfare aircraft. US B-57 Canberras were primarily used for dive bombing and strafing, with the early models mounting 8.50 caliber machine guns, 4 per wing. Later models mounted 4 20mm cannons, 2 per wing, for strafing. These weapons combined with their bomb loads, and 4 hours of flight time made them excellent ground support aircraft, as well as exceptional truck killers along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Deployed along the notorious trail for much of their 8 years in Vietnam, Canberras participated in truck hunting campaigns during Operations Barrel Roll, Steel Tiger, and Tiger Hound, gaining reputations with their Centurion Club, which consisted of Canberra crews which attained 100 truck kills. On May 16, 1965, an armed B-57B exploded on the runway at Bien Hector Square, setting off a chain reaction that destroyed 10 other Canberras, 11 Douglas A-1 Sky Raiders, and 1 Vought F-8 Crusader. Due to combat attrition, in October 1966, B-57Bs were transferred to Phan Rang where they supported operations in the Iron Triangle along with Australian Canberra B-20s. The aircraft also continued to fly night interdiction missions against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Of the 94 B-57Bs deployed to Southeast Asia, 51 were lost in combat and 7 other Canberras were lost to other causes. Only 9 were still flying by 1969. B-57s returned to Southeast Asia in the form of the Tropic Moon 3 B-57G, deployed to Thailand during the fall of 1970. Intended as a night intruder to help combat movement along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, these aircraft were equipped with a variety of new sensors and other equipment, and were capable of dropping laser-guided munitions. The relative kill rates per sortie during Operation Commando Hunt V between the B-57G and the AC-130AE showed that the former was not as suited to the role of trucker hunter. An attempt to combine both led to one B-57G being modified to house a special bomb bay installation of one Emerson TAT-161 turret with a single M61 20mm cannon as a gunship under Project Pavegat. After delays in testing at Eglin AFB, Florida, due to competition for mission time from the Tropic Moon 3 B-57GS, Pavegat tests proved that the B-57G could hit stationary or moving targets with its 20mm gun, day or night. Loaded with 4,000 rounds of ammunition, the Pavegat B-57G could hit as many as 20 targets, 3 times as many as the bomb-carrying B-57G. The Pavegat aircraft could avoid anti-aircraft fire by firing from offset positions, while the bomb carrier had to pass directly over the target. Deployment to SEA was resisted, however, by the 7th and 13th Air Forces and others as the decision had been made in August 1971 to return the B-57G squadron to the U.S. in early 1972, leaving insufficient evaluation time. Project Pavegat was terminated December 21, 1971. The B-57G was removed from Thailand in May 1972. Plans remained for the continuation of the B-57G program, but post-conflict spending cuts forced the abandonment of these plans. For a short period South Vietnamese Air Force personnel operated 4 B-57B aircraft. The VNAF never officially took control of the aircraft, and, after accidents and other problems, including apparent claims by VNAF pilots that the B-57 was beyond their physical capabilities, the program was terminated in April 1966, and the aircraft were returned to their original USAF units. B-57 Cambra losses during the Vietnam War. Figures include 2 B-57E Cambras from the 1st Det 33rd Tactical Group. Pakistan. The Pakistan Air Force was one of the main users of the B-57 and made use of it in 2 wars with India. In the Second Kashmir War of 1965, B-57s flew 167 sorties, dropping over 600 tons of bombs. 3 B-57s were lost in action, along with one B-57F electronic intelligence aircraft. However, only one of those 3 was lost as a result of enemy action. During the war, the bomber wing of the PAF was attacking the concentration of airfields in North India. In order to avoid enemy fighter bombers, the B-57s operated from several different airbases, taking off and returning to different bases to avoid being attacked. The B-57 bombers would arrive over their targets in a stream at intervals of about 15 minutes, which led to achieving a major disruption of the overall IAF effort. PAF's B-57 squadron was the first to form a regular formation aerobatics team of 4 such aircraft. The unknown Pakistani flying ace, 8 Pass Charlie, was named by his adversaries for making 8 passes in the moonlight, to bomb different targets with each of the B-57's bombs. During the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, the PAF again made use of the B-57. On the very first night, 12 IAF runways were targeted and a total of 183 bombs were dropped, rendering the Indian airfields useless for 6 hours to 6 days. As the war progressed, PAF B-57s carried out many night missions. There was a higher attrition rate than in 1965, with at least 5 B-57s being put out of service by the end of the war. They were retired from PAF service in 1985. Variants: B-57A, first production version. 8 built. B-57B, definitive production version, tandem cockpit, 8x0.50 and machine guns or 4x 20mm cannons, 4 underwing hardpoints. 202 built. B-57C, dual-control trainer, first flight, December 30, 1954. 38 built. B-57E, target tug, first flight, May 16, 1956. 68 built. B-57G, B-57BS modified as night intruders with FLIR, LLTV and laser designator in the nose, capable of using laser-guided bombs. 16 converted. EB-57A, electronic aggressor aircraft converted from a B-57 as. EB-57B, ECM aircraft converted from B-57BS. EB-57D, ECM aircraft converted from a B-57DS. EB-57E, electronic aggressor aircraft converted from a B-57 as. A B-57A, photo reconnaissance version with cameras installed aft of the bomb bay. 67 built. A B-57A avionics included an ANAPS-11A transponder and ANAPA-90 indicator group for command guidance and was tested for MSQ-1 controlled pinpoint photography in 1954. A B-57B, photo reconnaissance aircraft converted from B-57BS. A B-57D, C. Martin. A B-57D Canberra, high-altitude strategic reconnaissance version, J-57P9 engines, wingspan increased to 105 feet, first flight, November 3, 1955. 20 built. A B-57E, C. Patricia Lynn project, B-57 is modified to all-weather reconnaissance aircraft, used in Patricia Lynn missions during the Vietnam War. 6 converted. A B-57F, C. Martin. A B-57F Canberra, high-altitude strategic reconnaissance version developed by General Dynamics. Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofan engines, wingspan increased to 122 feet, first flight June 23, 1963. 21 built. WB-57D, Air Weather Service RB-57DS used for nuclear atmospheric sampling testing. WB-57F, Air Weather Service RB-57FS redesignation after June, 1968, operators. A Pakistan Air Force, No. 31 Bomber Wing No. 7 Squadron Bandits, No. 8 Squadron Haders. A Republic of China Air Force, a United States Air Force, list of B-57 units of the United States Air Force, NASA, NCAA High-Altitude Mapping Missions, Incorporated, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States Commerce Department, aircraft on display. A B-57A, 52-1426, Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. 52-1446, Glen L. Martin Maryland Aviation Museum, Middle River, Maryland. 52-1456, Selfridge Military Air Museum and Air Park, Selfridge ANGB, Michigan. 52-1467, Glen L. Martin Maryland Aviation Museum, Middle River, Maryland. 52-1475, Museum of Aviation at Robbins AFB, Georgia. 52-1482, USAF History and Traditions Museum, Lackland AFB, San Antonio, Texas. 52-1485, Selfridge Military Air Museum and Air Park, Selfridge ANGB, Michigan. 52-1488, New England Air Museum, Windsor Locks, Connecticut. 52-1492, Hill Aerospace Museum at Hill AFB, Utah. In April 1968, this aircraft was delivered to the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson AFB in Dayton, Ohio, and was displayed there until 1982 when it was transferred to the Hill Aerospace Museum. B-57B, 52-1576, Air Force Flight Test Center Museum, Edwards AFB, California. 52-1584, Kalamazoo Aviation History Museum, Kalamazoo, Michigan. EB-57B, 52-1499, National Museum of the United States Air Force, Wright-Patterson AFB, Dayton, Ohio. This aircraft was assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio as a test aircraft in the early 1960s. In 1965, It was returned to combat configuration to replace combat losses in Southeast Asia. It was assigned to the 8th Bomb Squadron at Phan Rang AB, South Vietnam in 1967, where it flew combat missions for 2.5 years. Upon return to the United States, it was converted to an electronic countermeasures B-57B and was flown to the museum in August 1981. It is on display in the museum's Modern Flight Gallery, where it replaced an B-57A that had been on display at the museum since April 1968. In 2012, museum staff reconverted it to stock B-57B configuration and placed it back on display. 52-1500, Vermont Air National Guard's Burlington ANGB at Burlington International Airport in Burlington, Vermont, 52-1504, GS Linear Air Park, GSAFB, Texas. 52-1505, Malmstrom AFB Museum and Air Park, Malmstrom AFB, Montana, 52-1509, Laughlin AFB, Texas. 52-1516, Air Force Armament Museum at Eglin AFB, Florida, 52-1519, Marchfield Air Museum, March ARB, Riverside, California, 52-1526, Edward F. Beale Museum, Beale AFB, California, 52-1548, South Dakota Air and Space Museum, Ellsworth AFB, Rapid City, South Dakota. RB-57D, 53-3982, National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson AFB in Dayton, Ohio. This is one of the 13 photo reconnaissance RB-57Ds. It is painted as it appeared in the late 1950s while serving in the 4025th Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron. It went on display in the museum's Cold War Gallery in 2004. B-57E, 55-4244, Strategic Air and Space Museum, adjacent to Offutt AFB in Ashland, Nebraska. 55-4274, Palmer Air and Space Museum, adjacent to Davis-Monthan AFB in Tucson, Arizona. EB-57E, 55-4253, Castle Air Museum in Atwater, California, 55-4279, Peterson Air and Space Museum at Peterson AFB in Colorado Springs, Colorado. 55-4293, Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum at the former Lowry AFB in Denver, Colorado. WB-57F, 61-13501, Palmer Air and Space Museum adjacent to Davis-Monthan AFB in Tucson, Arizona, 63-13293, Museum of Aviation at Robbins AFB, Georgia. Specifications. Data from Quest for Performance, General Characteristics, Crew, 2, Length, 65 feet, 6 inches, Wingspan, 64 feet 0 in, Height, 14 feet 10 in, Wing Area, 960 FTA², Empty Weight, 27,090 pounds, Loaded Weight, 40,345 pounds, Max Takeoff Weight, 53,720 pounds, Power Plant, 2 Wright J65W5 turbojets, 7,220 pound forces each, 0 lift drag coefficient, 0.0119, drag area, 11.45 FTA², aspect ratio. 4.27, performance, maximum speed, Mach 0.79 at 2,500 feet, cruise speed, 476 miles per hour, stall speed, 124 miles per hour, combat radius, 950 miles with 5,250 pounds of bombs, ferry range, 2,720 miles, service ceiling, 45,100 feet, rate of climb, 6,180 feet per minute, wing loading, 42 pounds FTA², thrust weight, 0.36, lift-to-drag ratio, 15.0, armament, guns. 4 20mm M39 cannon, 290 rounds gun, bombs, 4,500 pounds in bomb bay, including nuclear bombs, 2,800 pounds on 4 external hardpoints, including unguided rockets. Avionics, APW-11 Bombing Air Radar Guidance System, Shore and Bombing System, APS-54 Radar Warning Receiver, see also. Related development, English Electric Canberra, Martin B-57D Canberra, Martin General Dynamics B-57F Canberra, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Avro CF-100, Ilyushin Il-28, Martin XB-51, North American AJ Savage, North American B-45 Tornado, related lists, list of bomber aircraft, list of military aircraft of the United States, references, notes. Bibliography. External links, NASA/JSC High Altitude Research Program, Big Day at Baltimore, a 1951 Flight News Report.